Right, so I think everybody can still hear me and we're good to go. So a bit of an introduction to what is Multicultural Network in Finance. So like I mentioned, we are a network and we are dedicated to enhancing visibility of multicultural talents working within the finance sector and also creating greater cultural inclusivity within finance. And we actually decided to start this network because of the results of a survey that we had conducted in 2021. And these results were quite telling. So unconscious biases, microaggressions, and the lack of role models make the career experiences for employees of multi-ethnic backgrounds a lot more challenging than for their peers. And we do this through our mission, which is to work across the sector to promote more visibility and inclusion for employees of all origins and backgrounds in finance. And we do this through our values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So just a bit more about what exactly our priorities are as a network. We want to promote visibility of multicultural role models, not only within the sector, but outside of the sector as well. Recruiting and promoting multicultural talents, as well as making the culture of finance a lot more inclusive. We also focus on addressing any biases that may be seen in HR processes, as well as addressing microaggressions. So one way that we thought would be interesting to tackle this is by creating a pledge, previously known as the Multicultural Bankers Pledge for Institutions. And this pledge is set out to describe your commitment for multicultural and inclusive leadership. So far we have 9 companies who have signed the pledge, and we're open to expanding this number throughout the upcoming year. And not only do we have a pledge for institutions, but we also have a pledge that individual employees, like yourselves, can also sign as well. And this is action steps that you can take to promote multicultural inclusions within the institutions within yourself. So our series of webinars was actually inspired by the points of our Multicultural Bankers Pledge for Institutions. And today we'll be tackling the second point, which is committing at board level to zero tolerance of harassment and bullying. So with this, I will then leave the floor then to Dominique, who will give us a very insightful session today.
Thank you, Mati. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen over here. Is everybody able to see the slide there, the intro slide? Okay, perfect.
Yes, we can.
Yes, but you just have to turn on your camera again because of the
it turned off.
all of you
Okay.
their camera anymore.
Here I am. Hello. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Really lovely to be kicking off this series here with you today. So we're going to be talking about serious stuff, right? It's about commitment and accountability. And this is something that I find is paramount to building that trust that we so much, that we need so much, right? Whether it's between individuals or between an institution and the individuals, trust is really key. And so how do you build the trust is with this consistency when people know that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, right? So we're going to see in a little bit of detail, what steps that entails and how you can build a solid framework to make sure that harmful behavior doesn't happen in the workplace, and if it does happen, to make sure that you handle it effectively. All right, so about me, I think a few of you know me already, but I'll just quickly go through it. So I have a background in talent development, talent management, DE&I as well. So right now what I do is DE&I consulting, anti-racism training, and I'm also a career coach. In a nutshell, being bicultural is the starting point of what brought me to this work. Just kind of realizing sometimes the different universes in which we live and thinking about like a disconnect in what we're aware of, right? It can change tremendously depending on which side of the pond we sit on. And so, thinking about unconscious biases, all of those things really got me thinking and got me engaged into this work and trying to bridge the gaps between individuals and between communities and making sure that we have this constructive dialogue and try to understand each other's perspectives better. All right. So I wanted to ask you, and you feel free to type into the chat your answers. What comes to mind, to your mind, when you think about zero tolerance? When it comes to harmful behaviors in the workplace, what does that mean to you? Because it's very interesting to see what are the different viewpoints there. Role modeling for from leaders. Okay. What else? Okay, it should be obvious. Okay, it's evident. Feeling safe at work. Okay. And what does that look like? If you think of, okay, something happened. All right. Strong consequences and no exceptions. Okay. All right. So I think that we're pretty much in alignment when it comes to zero tolerance. I think everybody understands those words pretty much similarly. So how come that's not always what the people feel like, right? So again, here it's about removing the disconnect and making sure that we are putting in place structures and systems that are aligned with the position that we have committed to. Okay, so just the agenda for today. As we said, we're going to be talking a little bit about this disconnect in awareness. And then we're going to be looking at the zero tolerance playbook. So that's really a framework that allows you to, how do you build systems and how do you build that accountability, the structure for reporting? How do you make sure that you embed the zero tolerance in the way that you work, right? In the systems that are underlying your work. Third, we're going to be talking a little bit about microaggressions. I won't spend too much of the session on it because I know a lot of you have probably gone through a training on it, but it was relevant when it comes to this because as much as there's a lot of stuff that we can do on an institutional level in terms of creating structures and systems, when it comes to microaggressions, there's a lot that we can also do on an individual level as well. So it's interesting to kind of equip people with the right tools and mindset, almost, I'm going to say, to address microaggressions when they occur, right? And then finally, it's always my favorite part, is getting you to work, right? It's thinking about what are you going to do? Like, what's your relationship to the topic? How do you want to engage? And what are you committing to, right? So give me a thumbs up if that sounds like the reason, why you came here today. Is there anything that you burned to address today? Just feel free to pop it into the chat if there's anything that I missed in the little intro there that you were really, really keen to talk about. And if not, then we shall get started. Okay, cool. So, wait, where am I? No, so, okay, cool. So I wanted to a little bit view a little example, right? And I want you to maybe close your eyes if it helps you visualize the situation. It's very short, but think about this situation, right? So there's an employee who witnesses exclusionary behaviors, right? They are not sure how to act. So just try to kind of like fill yourself up with that emotion of being sort of triggered by something that you see or hear, and the confusion that comes with not knowing, or the frustration also that comes with not knowing how to respond, right? How to address the behavior, or where to look for information or support, was the best course of action, right? So kind of let that fill you up. And then think about some of the ways that you can act in that situation. Go ahead, and we're not going to do a poll. We're going to do a chat thing. So it's easier. I think low tech always the go-to. So go ahead and put in the chat. If you feel so inclined, feel free to just like raise your hand if you want to just like unmute your microphone and just talk live. Always nice to hear and see people. But otherwise, go ahead and put in the chat. How can you act in that situation? And if you don't know, if nothing comes to mind, then maybe just like start listing the barriers, right? Because kind of what it's about, right? So if we don't know how to act, it's probably because there's a bunch of barriers that are in the way of us thinking of a solution. So maybe let's talk about the common barriers, right, that we see in addressing those types of behaviors. What are the barriers that you can think of? Right? So that's a kind of a hierarchy problem, right? Or a seniority problem where the person is too influential or too important, that we think, yeah, how do you say, le pot de terre contre le pot de fer? So they're too powerful, I can't do anything. All right, so obviously there's the lack of awareness about what's available in terms of processes and support. There's the fact indeed that we are, wait, I actually do have a slide so that we can see it in real time. Okay, lack of awareness. So people have not been trained on what's available. They're afraid it's going to come back in the negative consequences for them. Or actually there aren't any appropriate procedures in place. And that happens too, right? Or they're outdated, or for, whatever reason, they're not relevant anymore. So we'll see in a minute when we talk more specifically about how to set up those processes, the importance of reviewing them. So it's not a one-time thing that you do and then 30 years later it's still the same. It's something that is a living thing that you need to keep up to date so it stays relevant, right? And then, the cultural tolerance. So and by culture, I mean a culture can be from a country, but it can be from a group. There's group culture, right? Company culture. If you're there's team culture. So if you're in a team and certain behaviors are accepted as a norm and as culture. So for example, if we think of humor, and if I don't know, people have a dark humor and it's accepted. I'm taking extreme examples, right? But if extreme humor is accepted as culture in the team, right? Then you might be afraid that calling out some of the jokes might actually not be well perceived or welcome, because you'll be perceived as the troublemaker if everybody thinks it's funny and it's part of, that's just how we roll, so that's kind of, culture can be one of the obstacles that people think, okay, I'm not going to report this, people are not going to take me seriously. Okay. Absence of support, or there's not enough of support. The management not following up, that is obviously what we mentioned before. So it's having this commitment. I think, Mati, you mentioned commitment even at board level and then trickling down through the organization, the organizational levels. But definitely this is something that is being role models by the senior leaders, of course, right? And then so clarity, right? If there's not enough clarity in how it works in the procedures, if it's your boss, right? How do you report it? What's going to happen? Who do you go to if it's your boss? Things like that. You're afraid that it's not going to stay confidential. You're afraid that you're not going to be protected as a result. So kind of some of these consequences are kind of like mutually having consequences on each other, right? So that's a lot of challenges. Okay, so all the more so important to build a framework that's really solid and that answers these challenges, that anticipates even these challenges, because it can be simple as day if you have all of those things in mind, rather than say a vague statement, which is what we see often. We do not tolerate any, and then like a vague expression to say inappropriate behavior, and then leave it at that. Then your first thing that you're doing is leaving it to bias, individual bias, what inappropriate means. And in some places, whether it's team culture, country culture, company culture, personal culture, doing one action might be completely okay, and in another, it can be offensive. And so you can't leave it at that. You have to be very clear and precise about what you mean. Okay, so with that, I want to introduce you to this framework here, and it's intentionally simple visually, because what I really want is for people to, to really like lock it in. how simple it can be. Of course, there's details, but it's simple in how we think about it, okay? So it's conveniently named SAFE. And so the S is for setting standards, okay? So it's really about everything you put in place up front, the policies, all the guidance to, to cover everything that has to do with these unacceptable behaviors. So defining what they are, those unacceptable behaviors, is one of the keys, right? You need to be precise about what it is. And then you need to also be clear about what the consequences are. You can't just say, we don't tolerate. You have to be clear about what happens if you do those things, okay? So setting standards. And then the A is for accountability and action, right? So this responsibility for addressing the behaviors is something that is both on an institutional level and on the personal levels, which is why I'm saying it's shared, right? But of course, the institution needs to empower and equip the employees on an individual level to do that, but it's a shared responsibility. So we'll see in a moment, how do you make that happen? So S, setting standards, A, accountability and action, and then F is fostering inclusive culture. And that has to do with equity, psychological safety. It has to do with, dialogue and collaboration, right? So all of those things are creating an environment where empathy becomes much deeper, right? Where we can have clear conversations, honest conversations about things, and hopefully creating rapport between people so that those situations don't happen anymore or are minimized. And when they do happen, that the right conditions and the right relationships are in place so that we can address them in a constructive and effective way. And finally, the E is for empowerment and empathy. So equipping people with the right tools, to address the situations, and also supporting people when those situations happen. Okay. So give me a thumbs up if this is clear for you. Thumbs down if you find that it's not clear at all. If any part of it you'd like me to explain again, we'll go into each in more detail, but just kind of wanted to, get a quick sense of where you are right now. And so the idea here is really to accompany you. So give you first awareness about what can be done on an institutional level, like upfront, proactively, setting the right stage, setting the right procedures in place. And so then based on your own role in the organization and your own relationship to those procedures, then at the end of the workshop, we're going to be able to see, okay, what then can I do? So now that I know all of this, what can I do? But it's important, I think, to have the framework in mind and think kind of more high level to begin with. Okay. So interesting to consider is the spectrum of the behaviors. This here, I can compare. I don't know if probably Claire, you'll be aware of this. In France, there's a union, I think, that put together a sort of it's a spectrum, I guess. They call it the violentomètre, and it was ranking and categorizing different types of violence and aggression against women, right? So they were calling the violentomètre. And I think that this, to me, is very important for companies to do, is to, as they think about the different types of inappropriate or harmful behaviors, is to really start to look precisely at what it is we're talking about, and being clear about, okay, the level of severity, so that it informs the consequences as well, right? So in the same vein as the violentomètre for gender violence and sexual violence, think about, okay, what are the different kinds of aggressions, starting from a microaggression on something very, very light, annoying, yes, but light, all the way through illegal, racist stuff, very, very severe stuff. So in between those two things, That's what we call usually the gray area. You know what I'm saying? And this is what you need to remove. This is what you need to have clarity over. So by defining those things much more clearly, you're going to give yourself the opportunity to plan much more effectively. Okay? All right. Okay. So the first box in the SAFE model was around setting standards. Okay. And as I said, it starts with being clear and precise. What is it that we're talking about? When we say we don't accept inappropriate behavior, okay, what is inappropriate behaviors? So first of all, define what is appropriate behavior, what are the expectations for an employee professional behavior, and define what the offenses are. Okay, be specific and precise, not using vague terms that are going to leave too much room for interpretation. Okay, so be specific, define the expectations for the good and for the bad. And then make sure the guidelines are accessible, right? Make sure that people know where to find it, but make sure that they can understand it. If you start making things like a legal document that's so unintelligible, then nobody understands what you're talking about, you can be sure that nobody's going to read it. So make sure it's accessible in that way. Okay. Make sure people know exactly what they need to do and where they need to go when they need to report an offense, right? If it's too complicated, too vague, or they don't have a clue, then they just won't report it. They'll talk about it with their friends and it stays like that. So you want to make sure they know exactly where to go to, who to go to, and how they can report incidents. Okay? Then we need to make sure that the people who are reporting incidents are protected, right? Because that's one of the things, like, if you want to build psychological safety and trust, but then with the minute somebody raises a concern, there's retaliation against that person, then that's not okay, So whistleblowers have to be protected. You have to have like a clear and transparent policy around that as well to make sure they are protected. Okay. And then one thing that I think is very key is that as you are developing your procedures, as you are developing your policy, make sure to involve the people. So having like focus groups, working with your ERGs to make sure that one, you are relevant in the things that you address. For example, when you define what are the harmful behaviors, for example, it's interesting to have like a group of representative groups of employees who are giving you like real life examples. What are the things that we see in the company? What are the things we don't want to see anymore? So make sure it's relevant and really rooted in the real life experiences of people. At the very least, have them review it, but I would say go as far as involving them in the process of developing it. Okay. And then make sure, it's communicated about. Don't just draft like the most wonderful policy and then put it in your drawer or somewhere on the intranet. Make sure you make a big fuss about it, communicate about it, do a campaign to make sure there's, that you raise awareness about the existence of the policy, make sure it's in the onboarding documents so that everybody is clear that it exists and where to find it. Okay? Feel free to stop me whenever you have questions. I'll quickly go through the acronym and then, I'll put you to work. So,
Dominique, if you allow me, I
Yes.
just wanted to emphasize even more about the importance of communication, because in our survey of 2021, that was also something we discovered, that the more people were at risk of being discriminated, the less they had information about where to go, what was allowed, what was not allowed. And so we think that once we have put things on the intranet, it's visible, but it's not. And so, for instance, to make sure the communication is effective enough, having like a yearly campaign, which comes year in, year out, again and again and again every year, is an essential, I think. It's really important to understand that most employees in their daily job have absolutely no idea of what we are talking about. So it's really something we tend to underestimate. That was just what I wanted to share.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. And I think even for the people who already know, I think that sometimes time can make you trivialize things because you think that you know, and that's where bias creeps in. So I think that keeping it alive, keeping it fresh, you know, there's ways that you can market it, market your campaign so that it stays fresh. So it's like, remember how last year we were so good? Okay, let's keep up the challenge. And like, okay, and then you start rehashing the things. I'm just like trying to think on my feet, but what I'm trying to say is, make sure that people stay engaged with it. The worst thing you can do is have people who have seen it 10 years ago think they know everything about it, and then they go and mess things about, So really important to make sure you keep everyone engaged, new ones, and then, more senior ones. Okay, so the second one is around accountability, right? So as we said, committing at board level, okay, that's where your accountability is going to trickle down. If the board does not care or even know about it, then what do you think that the people under them that have a lot of pressure, they have goals and everything, if it's not part of the priorities at the top, why do you think it's going to be part of the priorities elsewhere? So it needs to be a clear message, a clear statement from the senior leaders, from the executive boards, that this is something that we take very seriously and that we are committing to, right? Appointing an executive sponsor is going to allow you also to make sure that this stays on the radar. They're going to have the influence necessary to push some things on the agenda, to make sure that you have resources. That's important, right? To make some events, to invest in networks, etc. So those two things are very important. And then making sure that, as I was talking about goals, right? So those KPIs that they have for business and sales and revenue, they're serious about those KPIs. So if you want to make inclusion relevant for them, make sure that you tie their performance to how well they perform in those areas too. So having a KPI that you can measure against, having an inclusion index, and making sure that they are being reviewed as they are reviewed in their yearly performance, then you can be sure that there's going to be action there. So if you're a person in executive training, a person in executive talent management, if you are in those types of rooms, say a few words about that to your leaders, because that's really what what it comes down to. And then it also, as I said, trickles down the organization. So if in your performance and in your goal setting, because it starts with goals, right? Not with the achievements. It starts with the goals you set at the beginning of the year. If every individual has those things in mind in the way that they do their work, then you can track it throughout the year, and then you can measure it at the end of the year. So very important to engage people in this way and make sure that you train them, of course, so that they have the tools available, right? Having structured reporting, having impartial investigations is, of course, necessary. So I can't report, say, my boss, and then having my boss do the investigations. It just doesn't make sense. Or having my boss's friend. So it needs to be somebody who's impartial. And if it needs to have to be an external person, then so be it. But it needs to be fair in that way, and make sure that you follow up in a timely manner as well, so that people are not kind of led to believe that it's not a priority, so that people are not led to believe that it's something we're trying to push under the rug, or that we're playing the what I like to say, just waiting for time to erase the problem. No, you need to make sure that people know it's serious, you're serious about it, and you're going to be investigating in a timely manner. Okay. All right. So again, feel free to interrupt me when you have any questions. There's a comment here about being the only one. Yeah, I think that was the question before. All right, but let me know if it's not. But I think it was the question before. Okay, so we talked about setting standards. We talked about accountability. Now, fostering an inclusive culture. And as I said, it's a shared responsibility. It's not just me, it's not just the organization, it's both, right? So in terms of the organization, making sure that we have like procedures and systems, policies that are equitable, but also as an individual, am I applying those in an equitable way? Especially if I'm a manager, right? How do I assign work? It starts with those things, like who do you assign projects to? It starts with those small things every day, making sure that you are equitable in the way that you are doing your work, right? It's also about building empathy, because the more we can walk in somebody else's shoes, the more we can be aware of another person's point of view or perspective in the way that they are. If we think of microaggressions, I bet you that if most of the people, if they knew how it feels for the person in front of them, they wouldn't do it, right? The jokes or the this or this. So building empathy is key. Having empathy also at the organizational level, so making sure that there are support systems in place, that that people know where to look, like working with the EAP service, the employee assistance programs. That's very important, that not only is that in place, but people know about it. I can't tell you how many companies have those systems they pay for, right? Like the EAP, they pay for, and people don't know it exists. People don't know they have access to, say, like a psychologist or something like this. They don't know. So very important to let people know that if you are faced with a situation like that, not only are we going to investigate and take it seriously, but there's also support that you are entitled to and that's accessible for you. So people need to be aware of that. Okay. As we said, psychological safety is so important. I'll talk a little bit about psychological safety in the next few minutes, but this one is one that is often misunderstood. So psychological safety is not something that you can demand of someone. Psychological safety, a lot of people think, well, my people should know they can come to me. I have an open door policy. That's not how psychological safety works. Psychological safety is about, so what you're describing is your trust in them, right? So you trust that they're going to do something. What psychological safety is how they are convinced that if they do something, they will not be retaliated against. So that trust is different. You need to work on building that trust so that they know, because of your consistent behaviors, because of this stuff that you have built over time. So it's not a one-time event of saying something, it's building the trust over time so that people feel that they are safe. And that's something, that's not something you can tell them they need to do, right? They need to feel it. So psychological safety is about making sure that there are the right circumstances, the right behaviors that are consistently demonstrated so that people feel safe. And then they will speak up. Then they will, they will report things because they know, yes, they may happen, right? But they know that it's not accepted and they know it's okay to report. Okay. All right. And then the E, so we had the S, the A, the F. Now the E is about empowerment and empathy, right? So empowerment is, of course, about what we're doing today, making sure that there's training available, making sure people have the tools, right? And the knowledge and the understanding to be able to address the situations, to be able to proactively avoid the situations, right? So making sure that exists and not doing it after there's problems, right? Doing it proactively, making sure it's a way of working in the company to be proactive about those things, to make sure they don't happen rather than responding after they happen only. Making sure that you have safe spaces, ERGs, but not just ERGs, right? Safe spaces like open dialogues, discussions, we know when we have town halls or things like that, but making sure that those spaces of open dialogue and honest dialogue exists to make sure that there's this empathy building is very key. And then we mentioned the mental health resources. So, people know If on the intranet you have articles, if you have like a curated list of books, or of course, like the EAP contracts, so the employee assistance programs, make sure people know about that. Okay, that's very, very, very key. Okay, cool. So before we go into the next, want to highlight the importance of measuring things, right? Measuring the progress, tracking the progress, making sure that you keep reviewing, that you do get feedback, that you do surveys, that you have, first of all, metrics in place. So we talked about the leaders' KPIs, but I think that on at an organizational level, having metrics is really going to help you see where you are, see where you're going, make sure that you are staying on track. And then making sure that you are reevaluating. So when you do receive feedback from your employees, whether it's informal or formal, make sure that you listen, make sure that you are adapting accordingly, right? And I think that one of the key things is being transparent about that as well. So when you have your annual survey, tell people what the learnings are, what the insights are, and what you're going to do about it, right? So if something was reported, I think that a lot of the times organizations shy away from that because they think it's going to make them look worse, when in fact it's the contrary, because people know those things are happening. So it's not like you're, hiding it. They know. But what builds the trust and the psychological safety is you saying, I hurt, and now I'm going to do something about it. And that is what builds the psychological safety. Okay? Because people know that you have effectively taken action against those things. All right?
True.
Yeah,
If
go ahead.
you allow me, Dominique.
Yes, please.
I think sometimes even some companies go one step further than just reporting on the process and on the measures. For instance, publishing, of course, anonymously, but the list of sanctions that were taken for the year. I mean, as we are in finance, lots of financial institutions will do that about, people stealing money, of course, because that's usually our first idea of, oh my God, what could go wrong in a bank? It's if an employee are stealing money. But having to see, oh wow, someone had maybe just a serious sanction or was fired because of discrimination or unacceptable behavior, sexism, racism. That is really something which surprises the employees, and we say, oh, wow, so they are really meaning this then. So that's, I could say it's nearly the proof of a pudding. It's there.
And the fact that people are surprised is really telling about the
Yeah.
real culture.
Sure.
It's not about what goes on LinkedIn or the external communication that's shiny. It's look at the reactions of people when they see something like that happen, and they're like, whoa. And I've seen it happen in real time, like CEOs having, said something internally that was unacceptable, being called out about it, and then employees being in shock that the CEO was called out. And you're like, okay, so they do expect that, no consequences happen. That's their standard expectation. It's very telling. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Claire. Very insightful. Okay. Cool. So I'm gonna put you to work. So how many people are in the room there? Mathieu, I'm gonna let you take a look at how many people are there. I'd like to have breakouts of, let's say, maybe 6 or 7 people maximum. So let's do like maybe 6 groups. I think some of us might, maybe Claire and myself, were probably going to be thrown in one of the groups. We can either stay there or come back in the main room. But the idea there is that I'd like for you to think about. You can take a photo of the acronym if it helps you think more clearly around the different components. I think that initially I wanted to assign one group, but we're probably going to have too many, one letter per group. That's if that makes sense. Probably what we'll do is that have all the groups work on everything, but when we debrief, I'll ask just one group about one letter. So I want to give it a little bit more time. Let's give it 10 minutes. If you set up the breakouts, Mati, let's give it 10 minutes for the discussion in the room, okay? And then we'll take a few minutes after to debrief. So the idea there is so now that we've discussed the different components, right? I'd like for you in your groups to discuss for each of the pillars, so those are the 4 pillars here, for each of the pillars, what are a few actionable strategies that you can implement, right? So you work on all of the pillars. I know that the screen says just your assigned pillars, so you work on all 4 pillars. Of course, there might be some where you have more ideas, some that you want to like put on hold. That's fairly okay, but I don't want to constrain, make anybody constrained to constricted, sorry, to any of the pillars right now. Is that clear? Are there any questions about the expectation here? I do want to point out that you will need to assign a spokesperson so that when we do the debrief, I just call the spokesperson for each of the groups, and then you can report back. The idea here is really to just like be in a super brainstorming, very creative session there, because I think collectively there's ideas that, we're going to think, hey, I didn't think about that. So perhaps what would be great also, Matthias, if we can maybe collect some of the ideas there and we can report them back as well as a resource for later. Okay?
And maybe just, Dominique, in the
Yes.
meantime, I see there are a few interesting questions which entered.
Yes.
So it's interesting to maybe just quickly see them, and you will tell if you prefer to answer after the exercise. There's where can we find ideas or examples of relevant metrics which could be followed up on, and how can you gather the data, avoiding GDPR issues? That's from Candice, thank you. Then Raja asks, do we run the risk that we see a backlash in many companies? Yeah, of course, that's a very important topic. I guess we will have to address this over and over in the coming months. Probably, I would say personally that one of the key elements is making sure that we are extremely clear about why we do this. That we do not do this because there is this kind of DEI vibe. We do this because that's the way a company is performing better, keeping the employees more engaged, getting like a better teamwork, a better collective intelligence. So these reasons do not change all because of all of a sudden some populists get president and try to stop the work. So, but indeed, it's an important point. And even if there are some pressure to reduce costs, well, that's why it's interesting to work as a sector. Exactly. So that makes us more strong, I guess. Voilà. So these were questions. Maybe just also a recommendation. For some people, it may be a little bit uncomfortable to be thrown in a subgroup, but don't leave. Just enjoy the experience. It's really worth it, okay? So we see each other in small groups.
Okay, I think it's all good.
Okay, I'm not muted, so
okay, then
that's okay. Great, perfect. Yeah. Okay, so yes, so let's hear maybe from the spokespeople. If somebody doesn't feel comfortable sharing on camera or on the microphone, you can totally share on the chat. It's fine by me. But I would love to hear some of the ideas that popped up in your groups. Maybe whilst some people might want to type in the chat, I can share what I heard in the group that was with us in the main room. Huh? So people were talking about the transparency, so making sure that the processes were transparent, because people who are victims or who want to report things might sometimes not know, why does it take so long? Has it been stopped somewhere? Did it get into the wrong hands? People don't know why it takes a long time, or should it take a long time. So being very transparent about what are the steps and the different stages in the process, and communicate about those things as well. A great idea also was printing a poster to put next to the coffee machine about what are the inappropriate behaviors. I thought that was at the same time so engaging and so relevant. So I will definitely keep that one, by the way. Even for my kids, maybe I will print a poster. No, we do not kick our brother. I will just put like a nice poster. No, but seriously, that I think even if you don't want to be paying attention, unconsciously you will ingest the information. So I think it's a super great and creative idea. So who else wanted to contribute? Fatima, are you one of the spokespeople for your?
Yes,
Yes.
I am. Yes.
Okay,
So
great.
I have been decided that I would be the spokesperson of our group. So for the S, the first thing that came up is being clear what is unacceptable behavior, because we have expressions that can be literally unacceptable if it's in French or in Dutch. We also said that we should create awareness about what are the consequences of certain behaviors, because maybe people do stuff but they don't know what the consequence is. And the third one also that we put in the policies, it's not because you are not the one who is being attacked that you shouldn't talk. So the not my problem mindset should also change, and there should also be consequences for the people who don't report like bullying or harassment if they see it. So these were the 3 points that we have put for the S.
Okay. Thanks.
Do I do all the letters, or how?
No, maybe, I mean, unless we don't have answers from the other groups, but otherwise let's give them an opportunity to share on another pillar. But those are really great. So who was the spokesperson for the next group there? Just go ahead and open your microphone, or let me check if there's anything in the chat.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
I hear, but I don't see. But I hear.
Okay.
Yes, Nadine, yes.
Yes. Actually, we had the time to do only the S, so the standard.
Okay.
So we had, and yeah, maybe one for the accountability. For the standards, we had 4 actions. So the first one was about most of the companies have welcome weeks or welcome day for newcomers, and making sure that we share the policies with newcomers during those welcome week or welcome day, and also share with them where they can find the information back in the intranet of the company. The second one was linked to the intranet, where actually sometimes the information is there, but it's quite difficult to find it back. And so create visibility on the intranet, and also make it easily searchable by employee. And because sometimes it's hidden in more larger document like code of conduct, or more risk section of the intranet, where people don't necessarily think to look into. The third one was about having mandatory learning session on those topics. In some company, it already exists. And then the fourth one was about putting an item, an objective around that during the evaluation process.
Yeah. Wow. You guys were quite efficient. Thank you for those. And we'll, as I said, we'll make sure to capture those insights so that we can, share them with the group afterwards. Did anybody work on the F and the E? I'd love to hear from you if you did. Fatima, yes?
We did. So Tin talked to us about setting up tailored workshops, courses, and coaching to apparently they have a program for the young ones, as we also have at Bellevue site, where we create literally the trust and the collaboration between the new young ones who starts. And we should do the same thing about the inclusive culture. And it can be used, for example, if there are issues or maybe somebody have an unacceptable behavior, that he could be sent or she could be sent to one of those workshops to learn about what is inclusivity, diversity, and everything, and have literally inclusive workshops. That's one thing that we have put for the F. And the E, we were talking about providing coaches, personal coaches, to help them, the one who are harassed or bullied, or the one who has questions about it and wants to understand what's happening, or maybe even somebody who is bullying, even if he doesn't know that he's bullying, because some people are not aware about it, have specific coaches to help them and empower them and have that empathy to change them also.
So it would be like a form of counseling, you mean?
No, because counseling is just giving advice, while coaching is literally changing the mindset. So that's not the same thing. So counseling for me is somebody just giving advice, but with advice, you don't change a mindset. For me, coaching is a step further where you literally send from mindset A to mindset B.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then so that was for both for the F and the E, or did you?
Yes, for the A, we have put taking it up in the management contracts of the managers. So that if they don't address harmful behaviors, and there are like, I don't know, KPIs telling that in some teams there's a lot, that the manager is accountable for it.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing all of that. I see that you really got into the grind, and I think it's so helpful when there's so much more in multiple brains, and so when we kind of get together, generate ideas like that, don't be afraid to do it again, like with your groups as well. Generate some ideas, so I have some guiding questions, and then generate some ideas, and then debrief together. I'm not rebooting, but like resharing the slides, because I wanted to make sure that I have sound for the next one. We're going to watch the microaggressions, the video on microaggressions, which is a fun one and needs sound for it. Some of you may have seen it already, but it's always fun to watch it again. So let's do it. So you have the slides are back up, yes, on the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Cool. All right. So here we go.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
oh, you're so well spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while...
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland.
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date...
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
Going grocery shopping.
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV.
We have to keep the Redskins' name. It's part of our culture and history.
Or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day.
Can I touch your hair?
Multiple times a day.
So pretty.
Can I touch it,
hair?
please? Can I please?
Is fucking annoying. And makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes. Which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares?
Just another angry black one.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, Some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
I always laugh at this video. I think it's a cool way to engage in the topic. It's not always as funny, but at least for an introduction. And it covers such a range of different identities and different topics that I think it works in many contexts. So you might have people who are maybe less receptive to a certain topic, but that video will help because it covers more topic, if that makes sense. So if we're talking about multiculturality or race, and you have a person who is less sensitive to that, but you see this covers also ability, disability, covers also like studies, like people going to school with the school counselor advising the person to choose a less challenging major. So I think it's so diverse in itself, this video, that it works in many contexts with many people. So feel free to use it. Again, it's easily accessible on YouTube. Okay, so microaggressions. We call them micro not because they're not harsh, but because it's a small moment in time. It's we compare that. So there's the mosquito bite analogy or also the paper cut. But the fact is, there's something called death by 1,000 cuts, which means like when you're, cut a lot, a lot every day, all the time, it starts to become really serious and you bleed out, So it is kind of the idea of it's something small, but it has long-lasting effects and deep effects. But how and why are they powerful is the same thing as bullies, right? It's because we don't talk about it. And so, when maybe you were in school and the bully said, then don't talk to your mom about it. That's when you don't do it, you make them powerful. So the first thing you need to do is to talk about it and kind of derail the whole thing. So don't give them power by not speaking up, but also it's the subtlety of it. Sometimes you wonder, did I actually understand that right? I mean, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean that. It's sometimes so subtle, and it's by design sometimes. Sometimes it's unconscious. People don't realize they're doing it because it's based on their unconscious bias. But sometimes people are really like, sneaky with it, and they're smart enough to kind of like do backhanded compliments that are really meant as, at the very least to be unsettling. But all in all, that means that it's difficult to prove. It's difficult to prove because you could, put it in a context and say, I didn't mean it like that. So it's very difficult to prove. But that means also that it's very tough on the victims because you're quite isolated in your experience. If you can't get people to believe your experience, if you can't prove to anybody factually that the ill intent was there, then you're left alone with the burden of that. And that can be very difficult, especially if it's repeated, especially if it's over a long period of time. So very important to listen to people who are speaking up, and very important to have safe spaces where people can be in community with people who will listen and understand. I think that's the very minimum. Okay, so the different forms of microaggressions. Again, I'm not going to go into huge detail here. There's more important stuff that we want to discuss, but they can have different forms. So it can be something you said, it can be something you did or didn't do. Like if you're a waitress and you serve always the person of color last, that's a microaggression. And it can be environmental. Like my kids, when they read books from school, they only see blonde children illustrated in their school books. And that's a microaggression because in the environment that they are presented with, they do not matter, So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, what those three categories mean. And then we talked about intent, right? I didn't mean it like that. Well, the intent is what you thought when you said it, whether consciously or unconsciously, but the impact is not diminished because of your intent, right? The impact is valid, and actually the impact trumps your intent. Just because you didn't mean to hurt me doesn't mean I'm not hurt. And so it should be prioritized, the fact that I'm hurt, as opposed to the fact that you thought it was funny. Okay. So impact always more important than intent, even though we are sort of understanding and listening to the person, especially when they apologize. If they said, I didn't mean like that, we listen, of course, to what they're saying, but it doesn't diminish what happened and how you experienced it. Okay, so are we changing that, right? How are we changing this gap between the intent and the impact? That means, how do we get the people who do stuff without realizing to actually realize that they shouldn't be doing it, you know? So we need to, people need to educate themselves, right? To raise the awareness on the fact that that you don't, cultural awareness, first of all, that you don't touch a Black woman's hair or any woman's hair, but especially Black women, but like empathy, like if you see the person in front of you as a human being and an equal, there's so many things you won't be doing because you wouldn't be doing it to somebody else, right? I always share this kind of also analogy of touching the hair. I share it with other women of different ethnicities as like when you're pregnant, people thinking it's okay to touch your belly. Because all of a sudden, you're not a human being anymore. You are a carrier of life who belongs to the community. I mean, it's so strange how you are dehumanized like that, And it's the same thing. Like my curiosity trumps your personal space and your intimacy. So in any case, I think it's very important to build this empathy, and there are some exercises you can do to do that. And then restorative practices are really like deep conversations that are meant to heal and to bring a resolution that's not in judgment, but deeply understanding of both perspectives. And so getting the person to understand the harm that was done, but to learn from it, and collectively heal. So that can be so depending on the company culture, it could be something super powerful to do as well, that I don't think is done that much. It's very transactional often, but we don't, it's about like, okay, consequences, process, but it's not so much about like healing. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next. Here we go. All right, so here we will leave it to I'll just go briefly through it, but you will receive actually the decision tree for how to respond to microaggressions depending on who is the author of the microaggression, what's your relationship to them, how important is the relationship to you, what do you want as an outcome, will also inform what you do, right? If you think that there's no way that they can understand or change, but they are super, super senior compared to you, are you going to call it out and right in there? I don't know. Versus there's something that, I always take this example of is it the word, is it notary? The person, the lawyer who signs the papers for your house. And so I'm an adopted child, right? And he was talking about my mother and saying something in relation to like the legal stuff in the purchase of the house. And he said, well, if you and your sister were real children, and I was like, okay. Last time I checked, I am a real person. But his poor choice of words was not a reflection of what he thought, but it was really hurtful, and so deciding how many times a year or a lifetime do I see this person, is the relationship worth, like all of these things that you evaluate to make a decision if you want to either, okay, just like exhale, remove the burden from yourself and move on. That can be one solution, one way of addressing it. It's not always about going into a confrontation. Sometimes addressing it is always acknowledging what happened to you, and then making a decision what you want to do with it. So sometimes you want to bring it up. Sometimes you just want to let it go. And letting it go doesn't mean it's not harmful. It just means that you're not letting it remove your peace, you know? So you'll see the decision tree with detail on guiding questions, even to help you decide based on the situation what you can do. And then, of course, for the person who's the witness, who's a bystander in a situation like that, it's really about making sure that all of the subtle stuff, if you understand it's a microaggression, make it clear. Like, you know what I mean? This perception gap, bridge it, so that people can't get away with like, oh, no, no, Bridget, oh, when you said that, actually, this is what it's, this is how it's perceived, make the invisible visible. And then clarify that just because you meant it as a joke doesn't mean it's not hurtful, right? So you educate them on that. And also don't speak in your own voice, because it can be, first of all, quite threatening to someone to speak in their name, and also maybe they don't want you to. So I had an example of a lady who, when she was in university, a teacher was really, professor was really bad with one of the students, and she started to defend him, but she was saying, yeah, you do this and this and this, and look at him. And he was like, I didn't ask you. Like, he really like let her down in front of the whole class. So that was very bad. It was an extreme example, but in any case, it's you, right? I am feeling uncomfortable when you speak in that way. Okay? You speak in your own voice, not in on behalf of the person. Okay? That's how some of the ways that you protect the victim. All right, let's move on. So this is the decision tree. This is the French version, but it exists in English and in Dutch as well. So you'll receive a copy of that after probably early next week. There we go. But so always prioritize the victim's mental health and physical well-being. If it's not the right time to address an issue, don't do it like right there and now. Wait, let it simmer down a little bit. Always make sure that the person is safe. Okay, so let's do maybe one last breakout discussion. Do we have time? No, we won't have time. It's 10 minutes left, right, Mati? So I'll leave it, but I will ask you perhaps to think about it for later. I want us to have time to do the action planning right now. So, but take a mental note for after this session, maybe over the weekend, to think about some of the situations you may have experienced, or some of the situations you have witnessed, or maybe sometimes if you were the one doing it. Now that with everything that we talked about today, right, how could you have approached it differently, right? So I think interesting to kind of look at past situations so that we can learn from them for the future. Okay. Psychological safety. Yeah, a couple of myths about psychological safety. One being treat others as they would like to be treated. Not actually true. Treat others as, so the expression goes, treat others as you would like to be treated, right? And actually what is fine for you may not be for them. So psychological safety is treat others as they would like to be treated. So get to know them, find out what it is that they want, and then treat them accordingly, and not do not make assumptions, basically, is what I mean. Yeah. So what else? Yeah, of course, sometimes people will call out the, how do I say this? Authenticity. If you say, well, if I treat them as they would like to be treated, and if it's not how I would do it, does that make me a hypocrite? It's not, because you are genuine in your approach of trying to understand the person. Okay, so look at it that way. We may have differing views of what it looks like, but you are being genuine in the way that you are sincerely wanting to understand their point of view. So I think that helps bridge the gap there. Okay, So for the finish, I would like for us to take a few
There is a
minutes.
question.
Oh, there is a question. Go ahead.
Voilà.
Go ahead.
Edouard. We don't hear you, Edouard.
Can you unmute
your mic?
Yeah, thank you, Dominique. Thank you very much for this. Really appreciating the webinar so far. I just wanted to build a little bit on the psychological safety, and I'll share a link. Psychological safety is really about daring to do the opposite of the bigger group, to go against the current and speak up. And if the organization is willing to create an environment where you can have a sparkle because of good conversation, then indeed there's a psychological safe environment. And in this, respect, as what you are saying as a key element, is required to make it successful. But I think especially with psychological safety, the terminology on it is very specific. And needs a little bit more elaboration than only the conditions when it's successful. So I'm just sharing you the Harvard Business Review.
You're muted again.
As it is an interesting read, and it gives you some background on psychological safety as a topic.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I think for psychological safety, a few very simple exercises that we can do in terms of role modeling, especially, is like little routines that we can have, like in meetings. If you're a manager, to say, hey, let's start this week's meeting by sharing the things we messed up. So let's do like a contest. Who messed up like who has the most messed up mistake to share? Make it a game or something. Like, the reason is remove the drama from the failure. Failure is part of the process. Failure is part of growing. And if managers can role model that they are also making mistakes, and that mistakes are okay to share, the important part is knowing about it so we can fix them. If you don't come tell me, we can never fix it together, and it gets worse. So, the more we can be open in our conversation about the screw-ups and the failures, the better. But a lot of people are stuck with ego, and starting with managers as well. I think if we can remove that, it's really a success then.
By the way, one of webinars that we will organize with Women in Finance will focus specifically on psychological safety with Nathalie Delard, who is in the call as well today. So
super interesting. It's
feel
a wonderful
free
topic.
to make sure to register, because that's an opportunity to go even deeper on that specific theme. Maybe as I see that we have just a few minutes left, Dominique, maybe, I don't know if someone has like a burning question.
So just if I can just mention about the, excuse me, just 1 second. I will take the question, of course. I just wanted to say take a picture of the screen here. So I would really, really love for you, please do this for me as a New Year's present. Take a few minutes to think, self-reflect on what we covered today. As we said, you're going to receive the playbook, which is very much more detailed than what we saw today, but it will give you all the structure. But think about it in terms of what you can do. Where is my accountability? In my role, what can I do at my level to foster this culture of zero tolerance and of inclusivity? And then make some action steps, and that's like very concrete, actionable things that you can do. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it has to be concrete and something that you are willing and committing to do. Okay? So it'll take you 5 minutes, but I promise you this will move you forward to the next phase. All right. So the next question, Claire, you mentioned.
No, I just wanted to open the mic, and I think Nadine wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, it was more a question for Dominique. You mentioned at one point about the violentomètre that exists in France. Do you know if there is something existing for against racism? Yeah.
I looked, honestly, I didn't see anything that was as as powerful and detailed. I would say in any case that it's good to work on something like that internally, or maybe at sector level, and Claire has something we can think about. But I think that some of it will not that some of the behaviors are not not that the perception will change, but I think that depending on what it is you're focusing
culture,
on in your
maybe,
policy, you know, and I think it's a great way to start having the deep conversations. So maybe you sit down with your ERGs and your people, personne de confiance, and start discussing some of the issues that have been reported, and then start to look at, you know, and create this thing together. I think that's a great exercise to get into things. But I didn't see anything as detailed, powerful, and official as the violentomètre, just probably because of culture. France is not really discussing race or culture, you know, like, you know. So it's something that is needed, though, I think. Yeah.
True. Dominique, I also see that there were the two questions, but especially the one of Candice about where we can find examples of relevant metrics. Do you think in the playbook they can find a few ideas of these examples? And the question about how we can gather the data due to GDPR. Anything you want to answer on that?
So for the metrics, there's high level ideas of metrics. So it's not the measure specifically, but it's like you can measure the number of cases reported, or, you know, like, so ideas like that, high level. You have a list of things in the playbook. But then based on the company, of course, you will have, like, say, for example, if you have ERGs, right, you can have in your inclusion index or whatever, you can have like how many events, how many people are joining, how many, you know, depending on your setup, you're going to have different things that you measure as well. But there are some ideas already. And then the second question was... No, please.
No, sorry, maybe just precisely on that, I would like to tell people that if you start to take the number of cases as a KPI, and at the same time you start your communication campaign, expect, of course, your number of cases to go growing, and that is okay. It's because before, people would just have kept silenced. But if you make a campaign about this is okay, you can come forward with what you live, we are listening to you, obviously you will have more cases than before. And that is not a bad thing. And only after a certain time, you may see progressively a decrease. And there was also the question about possible GDPR issues related to the data.
Yeah, for sure. I think that feedback, especially when it comes to surveys, it should always be anonymized anyway. You don't want to be knowing who said what. What you need to be measuring is how many complaints, how long does it take to resolve, you know, things like that on a systemic level. You need to make sure of. The rest, you know, of course, there are, in Europe, it's always going to be more difficult, yet not completely impossible. You know, there are ways that we can measure. I think it's probably one of your topics as well, no? Measuring diversity and stuff like that. But I think working with your ERGs is really your play right now, because they know their members, they know the experiences. So get feedback, anonymized, of course, but get feedback from your ERGs to pour into you know, the insights that you give at corporate level. Right now, I think that would be my play.
Yeah, and use your sponsors, which is also the title of another webinar. So more reasons to keep following the sessions, everyone.
All right, everybody, I think we're at time or over time a little bit. I wanted to thank you so much for your participation. It was the first one. I think I hope that you enjoyed it. I was really honored to kick things off for this great initiative. I will, you know, wish you a very, very relaxing and fun weekend building snowmen and snowwomen in the garden. And best wishes again for 2025. Have fun with the multicultural bankers.
Thanks a lot, Dominique. It was really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Thanks.
Have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all.